So good morning. Whether it is to you or not, it is here in Los Angeles, and I'm with Gabe and Anthony, and we're going to pare the conversation down a little bit to some fewer voices, hoping that perhaps we can be a bit more clear in the details and the ideas that we're talking about and pass them on to the open ears who are listening out there somewhere. I also want to mention that anyone out there can always email and is always welcome to participate, whether it be one-on-one or recorded as a podcast for other people to listen to, or in the collective of the greater group. If you're interested, if you're sincerely interested in the conversation, we'd be happy to hear from you and talk to you about that and have you participate in it, and also to hear any of your questions and curiosities or any things that seem completely preposterous to you. Because this conversation challenges the basic precept of how humans have been thinking as long as recorded written history has been written. It's always evidence that their self-indignation has been used to suppress and oppress and hurt other people in the name of someone's idea of what's right. And it can't be right enough to make wrong for others become such a trend throughout history that there isn't something to look at and be more honest about and see that maybe we can unravel that simply by talking about it, looking at it, and starting to think of principles as something that we all share, which goes back to a question Anthony asked this morning, something we all share before the recording started. But if there's something we all share and we can talk about that, that gives us a common basis to begin to think in terms of each other rather than in terms of the thinking we do about each other as being the only thing each other is and the only thing we are as a result. So just a little precursor. So good morning, Anthony and Gabe. And
morning.
Anthony, your question again?
Yeah, my question was just to start almost from the beginning again, why are we here? What is there one common problem we're all having? Is there a problem? Is it individual? Does it change? What's going on?
Well, what do you think?
I think my focus
You come
is
every
on
week.
my focus is on the same thing every time. I was just wondering. Mine is that the fear of not getting something I want or something taken away from me. I think it's that basic.
Yeah, so that's what Bill says is generally the common, in the big book, that's considered the common nature of fear, not getting what we want and
Losing what we have.
Yeah. Other than that, I'm fine. Other than that, I'm great.
I'm thinking of the words he used was not getting what we demand, or losing what we have and not getting what we demand. So that's a different word than just what we want. Because a want is a very simple thing to have. We all have wants, and I would suggest every choice we make is based on a want, always. Even if we don't want something and we make the choice, we're wanting to not want it. There's a connection there. Ultimately, to your question, Anthony, if the symptom of addiction is drugs and alcohol and sex and gambling and relationship problems and money and any of that stuff that you can be addicted to, food. If that's a symptom and there's an underlying, which is an interesting term, it's an underlying disease, what would that disease be? And would that disease be primary to any thinking that is out of order in terms of thinking that something that's right is wrong or thinking that something is wrong is right? If we can induce a state of inner conflict and emotional turmoil and mental anguish simply by thinking about our thinking as being the opposite of what we're thinking, then we are the creators and perpetuators, the manifestors of that dilemma. The book says that. If anyone out there is familiar with the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, where the 12 and 12, Bill says, whenever there is a problem, no matter the cause, something is wrong with me. And what's wrong is that the thinking is the primary thing we do in our human experience to affect our experience. The primary thing that affects our experience.
And she has no idea about what you
I don't think it says what we
Anthony,
demand.
do you have a radio in the background?
Yeah, I'll turn it down. But I don't think it says what we demand. It says fear of not getting what we want, fear of not getting peace, not getting work done, not getting a handle on emotion, not getting happiness or satisfaction, not getting enough money to pay the bills, not getting enough money to buy things, not getting the answers to what we want from the sponsor of our program, not getting people to like us, not getting acceptance from others, fear of losing something we already have. So the ability to drink safely. Let me turn the TV down, but I don't think it says what we demand. I never actually heard that.
It
Okay,
sounds like
so-
my 10-year-old son.
So page 76, step 7, the chief activator of our defects have been self-centered fear, primarily fear that we would lose something we already possessed or would fail to get something we demanded.
I was wrong.
Well, generally, I don't tend to speak out of turn about things half-heartedly or I generally look at things pretty clearly. And it's not to say that I don't, because certainly there's enough of what I say and think that is not well enough versed yet to give words to in ways that are meaningful. But the point, though, Anthony, that you just made is that all of those things are included in that. The problem is that when we want something, okay, we want it. But when we think because our thoughts are reality, we have to have that thing to fulfill us, now it's no longer a want, it's a demand. And it isn't just a demand, it is a life or death situation that we think we need to accomplish. And what's the life or death of? A thought about who we are. It's not about us in our essence, it's about what we're thinking about
Feels like
ourselves.
it.
I know. Very good. It feels like it because you're feeling the thoughts you're thinking about it that are uncertain and unsure and doubtful, casting shadows of doubt. Think of that. This idea that we're blocking the sunlight, casting shadows of doubt. They're haunting. Those effects are haunting in our experience. And if we're making choices from that haunting experience, then we're using desperation as the foundation for the next choice. And what are we going to get? More of the same with a different face, a different time, a different place. Going to be the same situation over and over again. So when you ask, do we share it? I would say yes. Are the circumstances all the same? Probably not. Are the thoughts the same? Almost guaranteed not. Those are things that we get to choose. If we are free to choose what we want to think, and Gabe talked about this in this past year, where ultimately there are things we can't choose, things that are chosen for us. The fact that our brain is operating our body right now, we're not sitting around thinking about what it's doing and whether that vitamin is getting to the right organ. And wait a minute, hey, you're going down the wrong vessel. We don't do that. It just works. It understands and knows what to do. If we have that capacity on our own body, and yet we think thinking is the sole source of our life, we've obviously short-circuited a greater sense of awareness that's very clearly available to us to recognize and actually utilize. At the same time, as I've said before, before, if we are causing stress by having thinking become the only thing we think we have and the only source that we think we have and the only thing to do whenever we're desperate is to do more and more and more and more and more thinking about thinking, that actually undermines every one of those other aspects of our health that we don't have to think about for the most part because they're operating perfectly on their own or as well as they can. And all of a sudden, every one of those bodily systems, nervous system and the parasympathetic system and our cardiovascular system, all of them start to become undermined by the stress we're creating because that pressure ends up creating not only constriction, but inflammation at the same time, like squeezing a balloon. And the organs get tense and they don't function right because they're now pressed up against this pressure. The whole body starts to fail. So while we can say those things are things we don't have anything to do with, we're actually having everything to do with in terms of the determination of whether they're going to function on a healthy basis or an unhealthy basis. And if we create disease in our body through mental dis-ease, creating inner conflict, creating mental anguish, emotional turmoil, then we are directly responsible for all these things that are happening, including the circumstances beyond our body and the way we see things and the way we see people, the way we think they are, rather than actually who they are, all coming out of this one idea that my thinking is my sole source in the universe, that I have to think about it longer and harder. And when I do, things will get right and I'll figure it out. And it's never worked yet for me, ever. I've gotten better at thinking by basing my awareness of a knowingness that I have that's much greater than my thinking. and starting to recognize that that knowingness doesn't need to be defined, as Bill talks about having a God of your understanding. But in the pursuit of that understanding, if we're constantly told that progress rather than perfection is the goal, it means that we're constantly adhering to limitations in our thinking that are keeping us on a path of progressing, rather than actually conceding that the perfection of that absolute nature is our absolute nature right now. It isn't something to get to. It's just getting better at thinking about it, so our functional capacity begins to express it more directly, and we begin doing things that are possible rather than constantly trying to attempt to do the things that are impossible to prove that we're in fact right about the wrong thoughts we have. So that's like a 32-ouncer at 7-Eleven, a big gulp. So the fact, every moment we have a chance to choose, every moment we make choices, every moment we come to conclusions. If the conclusions we're coming to are to resolve something because we think it's convenient, but the thing we're concluding is wrong and we think it's right, we're actively engaging in that dis-ease on a momentary basis right now, because everything that happens in the present. All that's ever happening is what we're doing in the present, and all that's ever affecting us is what's happening in the present. Doesn't mean the things beyond our thinking aren't happening. It means that when we begin to recognize we're a part of it all, that everything is affecting us, primarily though, what we're thinking about everything and not what everything is doing necessarily. Because our thinking about it is the thing that's primarily affecting our feelings, manifesting our feelings. So now what are we doing here?
So how do we get the message to somebody quickly? I heard something on Instagram that was great. It says if you try to tell somebody what's wrong with their business, they'll never listen to you. But if you ask them, what do you need help? They'll tell you, so you're not fighting them all of a sudden. If I tell you what you need, you're going to fight me. But if I ask you what you need, you're going to tell me.
So on that basis, if we have a knowing nature, if there's an absolute, the steps and the whole movement of sobriety, modern day sobriety, came out of absolutes with the Oxford group, 4 absolutes: purity, unselfishness, honesty, and love, as I remember them. And what their basis was gauging, if I apply the actions that I'm about to take, if I apply the thinking that I'm doing to those 4 absolutes, do they stand up in the face of those? Are they pure? Are they unselfish? Are they honest? Are they loving? So that was the original. You ask, what do you do with it? That was the original application that led to the steps being principles. So in this, rather than in a business where it has things particular to what an owner may know that you don't know, if this knowing nature is in fact our nature, then we all know it and are simply acting as though we don't, because we're thinking we don't, because we're thinking is our source rather than a greater source of absolute knowing. And to transition to realizing that absolute means it's always been that way, and we've just been thinking it wasn't that way, reduces the problem, because now I don't have to go and find every single thought that isn't right. I can just begin realizing that it's only what I'm doing right now that's causing the effects that give me the impression that all the stories I tell about the past and this, that, them, or they, in fact, are just excuses. I'm literally blaming them, then, or they for the thing I'm doing. That's what excuses effectively are, and that's what most storytelling is about, because there's no moral in a story trying to tell somebody why I shouldn't be where I am if it weren't for this, them, then, or that. Wouldn't happen. We'd be looking at it with a constructive view and saying, wow, what did I do? What was I thinking less than? What was my thoughtlessness in this? I had an expectation that this would happen, but my thought clearly wasn't founded enough on information about reality to have that thing I expected happen. And normally dashed expectations are simply an idea that my thinking was so right, all I should ever get is what I originally expected. So part of that is coming to terms with the fact that all we ever get is what we get. And if you begin to just notice that, you'll see it's always happened, and there's assurance in that. There's assurance in all these principled ways of looking at things to relieve the pressure so that inspiration becomes the guiding source of thinking rather than this desperation that we create internally to this idea of self-centered, self-serving, selfish thinking.
But Jack, we talked about yesterday when things align with our thinking, we're at peace. When things are going our way,
Yeah.
we're content and not worried or not connected to this knowing awareness. Everything's kosher, so we're trudging right along and enjoying the ride.
Well, you're using circumstance as your God, effectively. If circumstance is going the way I think the thought I had about turning my thoughts into reality is happening.
It's happening, yeah. It's real.
But I guarantee you it is short-lived and always leads to a much greater catastrophic awakening of what am I doing? I've done this so many, that sort of incomprehensible demoralization. Think of that. Why is it incomprehensible? Because it's insane. You can't comprehend something that's insane. You can try, but never going to happen. Why is it demoralizing? Because it's immoral. Immorality is incomprehensible because within an absolute state of being, there is no immorality. There is no lack of virtue. There is no hatred. There is no fear. There is no war. There is no conflict. There's just an absolute state of being that is never disrupted. If we have the opinion because circumstances give us that, then we're just looking for evidence in how things are going, which means when they don't go our way, we feel threatened. We feel at a loss. We feel disconnected. We can't be disconnected from something infinite, but we use that fact of thinking because we think thinking is our sole source. When it fails, we think the infinite source has been disconnected from it. We think it isn't there. That's not true. That can't be true if truth is true. But we can think it is.
I think the same thinking is when it's going my way, I'm also disconnected. Like I'm not relying on it or interacting with it. It's just all going my way.
But you're having an experience that you're still having some sense of disconnection. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, like I think you still have the disconnect on both sides of the coin.
Good.
I'm
Well, that's you're right.
postulating. I don't.
You're absolutely right. I mean, that in fact is the broader view. You know, when you brought that up initially, I thought you were saying I feel connected when things are going my way. But adding the fact that there's always, my experience with people is that when they really get what they think they want, it's the most distressing day of their life. Because they've spent years trying to get there, they're finally there, and they realize that what they've been fighting for hasn't been in they've been fighting the present, thinking they needed to be in some other place than the present, when all along, all they ever were in the present. And thinking that thing that they would find in that other place would be there. And when they get there, what they find is the same emptiness that they've been creating in every one of those moments leading up to it. So what they've been mastering is an application of immoral, non-virtuous, non-esteemable, faulty, vulnerable, weak thoughts. They've been mastering those in the name of thinking they're going to get over them while they've been getting better at promoting them. I've certainly done plenty of that. So when I say they, I'm talking about my experience too. Coming to terms with absolute principles is dispelling, literally taking the words apart of all the stories we tell to come up with a narrative or a justification or a rationalization that gives us an impression that what we're thinking is right and real. And if it weren't for everything other than us, things would be better. If it weren't for the world and life and people, everything would be fine. And that's really the glaring oversight of realizing that the whole basis of that problem is starting with what we each choose to think, not what everybody else is thinking. We may be pulled along in their direction like a magnetic draw of matter has with gravity. We may be pulled in that direction, but we're choosing to be pulled in that direction because it's a complete mental landscape that we're manipulating. Matter in the universe seems to be things that obstruct space. Matter in the brain seem to be things that we have a great investment in, that we really think matter. Creates the same gravitational pull. So we pull more and more and more matter in and wonder why we don't feel like we matter. We're using our brain to do what it's capable of doing, but thinking of it as all that we are, which is a major leap from allowing our thoughts to function in a way where they can manifest beneficial effects and transform things. We don't create reality, we transform existing reality, whatever that is. So to your point, Anthony, if everybody already knows this because it's absolute knowledge, then we're really not telling anybody anything they don't know. We're simply talking about it as a reminder that the engagement of it, the consideration of it, would naturally allow an occurrence of it to become more obvious than the oblivion we've made believe that we were in or it was in, or the mystery or secret that we thought was the world and the universe. The world and the universe are not a mystery or secret. They've been doing everything they've been doing as long as they've been doing it. And we have been a byproduct of that as long as we have existed as humans. So it can't be a secret for it to always be happening. The secret is why I think, because I don't think it's happening, that I don't think that I don't notice that it's my thinking that I'm relying on, not what's actually happening. Gulp.
Yeah.
So in practical discussion, which very often this seems like the most impractical discussion because it literally breaks stride with the obsessive nature of thinking, that more thinking, if the thing, we've witnessed it in here where I've interrupted people and they've gotten very, very angry, right? I think you were both there a couple of those times. My experience is that obsessive thoughts are told in stories that do not like getting interrupted because the life of the person who is telling it is believed to be either threatened or the potential survival depends on how well they tell that story, which they've been often refining for years and decades. And those stories don't go away when people get sober and all of a sudden are free from alcohol. They become clear if we're looking at them accurately what they are. They become unclear if we think what sobriety is about now is really ramping up the new version of that story so it looks better, and we think we're convincing people we are better, while in fact we're struggling with something that's worse internally. So the practical nature of this is to start to see that there is absolutely nothing practical whatsoever in making believe our thinking is the source of our existence and the source of our self and the source of life and the source of God and the source of all that. That's ego in a nutshell. And actually ego in its proper use is the capital I rather than the small I that looks like a head and a torso with no arms and legs, the way it's written. That has no functional capacity. That self is just an idea. It's thinking of itself that we've determined is our self, which it isn't. It's just thought. When we think of our thinking, we're thinking of thinking itself. We're not thinking to ourself. But we have confused that. And that major little kernel at the bottom, if the seed's corrupt, the tree is going to be corrupt. So all the branches of knowledge that have followed have developed ideas and developed around ideas that have been trying to compensate for this wrong at the core of the thinking. Nothing practical about trying to feel better about something that you are continuing to refine as worse and get better at telling the story about it and justifying and acting fine. It's the story of Narcissus. Narcissus looked at an image in water, saw himself and became infatuated, so much so that he couldn't feed himself. He couldn't break away from it. He couldn't do anything that would have been healthy for him, nor could he do anything for the people he was responsible for in his life, his family, his wives, the kids, whatever else he had, his society. He was too busy looking at that. We've been too busy looking at thinking, which is a reflection. We even talk about reflecting on things. It's a reflection of thought, meaning we're promoting an image, we're creating images. All of our sensory data that we're being fed is being converted into language. We rely on that language as our only source. It's not our only source. We have a very clear awareness of a present state of peace or a present state of disturbance.
But that he fell in love with the reflection, the
Yes,
image.
the image.
Yes, I
Not
love that
himself.
story.
Hmm?
Not himself, but
Exactly. Well,
Wow,
he,
that's deep.
he might have, but think about that. When we look in mirrors, we say that's me, when it isn't, it's an image. A mirror reflects what stands in front of it. The positions we take in our thinking is what those reflections are. Those are positions we take. And when we think our position is the only position, we have taken on the fight of everything and everyone else. And what's the book say? We stop fighting everything and everyone. Why? Because we realize those positions have just set us up for problems. We become opposed, our posing position becomes opposed to all other things, rather than in absolute thinking, any position I take confirms that every other position can also be taken. There's the peace compared to the fight. Becomes obvious. I mean, this is an interesting aspect of all this. Good and bad, up and down, in and out, they all rely on each other. So if it's really good, it's not bad at all, right? But at the center of both of those things, that you're even at the midpoint, the neutral point. You become free of both because it's one or the other, and that's what freedom is, and that's what choice is. Realizing that any position you take is actually a position, and any feeling of stress you have is the idea that you can't take or no one else can take any other position. It's all happening in thinking. It's not happening in reality, except that we have the reality, the experience, the potential to create and manifest that, and then pretend that it has nothing to do with what we're doing. That the effect all of a sudden becomes absurdly some confluence of the universe or life hoisting itself, dropping it on my head, rather than I'm creating that. I'm manifesting that. Still there?
yeah. I don't, when I'm in those negative places, I don't perceive that I'm the creator of it. If that
Of
makes sense.
course. You'd be insane. You'd be sane to do that, and you're insane doing it. So that's why.
I know, but like you said, you can't see that it's you that's doing it.
Oh, yes, you can. You know
Or maybe
it.
you can, but it's like,
Yes. The knowingness, Gabe, is not in the thinking. It's in the awareness of it. As this conversation becomes a little considered in any sincere way, you'll start seeing that you actually have always known, because your knowingness is a very different feeling than your thinkingness. Because your thinkingness is always changing, it can be in conflict, it can have all these elements to it that have an insanity, right? An absolute knowingness isn't insane. It doesn't even, there's no potential for insanity because it knows everything. In reality, not in some imagined reality, not in some made up form of reality that's been determined to be reality when in fact it's just made up, make believe, literally. So, in that absolute sense, you've always known that and have become desensitized in the commitment you've had to the feelings you're trying to correct all the time and manage. But the actual, we talked about this yesterday, the unmanageability is realizing that there's nothing there to manage except the thought that there's something there to manage. And that's where the real insanity starts to become a little bit clear. If I have a thought that something's real and now I've got to manage it, it doesn't make that thing real. It makes me crazy thinking I'm going to fix it and correct it. There's nothing there but my thinking about it. So why, if I want to fix it, don't I just say, oh, I made it up, I can unmake it? Because the insanity tells me that because I don't think I'm doing it, it's the only thing I can do. And that's addiction in a nutshell.
Yeah.
So the other thing too, to your point yesterday, Gabe, is you don't see the progress you've made as clearly as it is to others, right?
Yeah.
So if we're discussing this and we're alone and we never talk to anybody else about it, we never get the perspective of somebody saying, wow, I've been with you on this ride and I've seen the progress. And the progress often, my experience, when I started actually getting clearer about this, I started realizing how sick I really was. And that didn't feel good. But I realized that this wasn't about feeling better. It was about getting better at feeling and starting to see it. If I'm looking at something disturbing and I'm not disturbed, I'm psychotic. I'm in complete denial. The book doesn't say happy, joyous, and free. And, you know, if you happen to witness somebody get run over on the freeway, just laugh it off. Bill talks about this being a sorely troubled world. Can we maintain our peace in the face of a sorely troubled world? And we can always have peace, but it doesn't mean denying that sorely troubled world exists. It means beginning to reckon with it and say, wow, there is a lot of work we could do here amongst ourselves, our human population, when it comes to a problem that I would say has been misdiagnosed throughout history. We've been refining the thinking about it, but suicide's at an all-time rate high, addiction's at an all-time high, violence, random acts of violence seem to be, I don't know if they're greater or less. I don't really know what the overall statistics are, but they seem to be at an absurd enough high to mention. Talk about kids going into elementary schools and just wiping kids out for what? Used to be you needed a justification to have war and kill somebody. Now it's just a blatant stupidity and idiocy.
Mm-hmm.
So that new high is really a new low. And we're kind of shrugging our shoulders and I don't know what to do. Well, we continue to do the thinking we've been doing collectively as a society, then the social illness of society is going to produce those sorts of behaviors and act like we don't have anything to do with it and can't even conceive of why somebody would do it. Mental anguish is at the core of mentally ill decisions, sick decisions. It's not a surprise. It's not a coincidence unless coincidence is seen as a coincidence happening simultaneously right now. So honesty in the conversation, as I was saying, if we have you're listening to this out there and not talking to anyone about it and not exploring the ideas, what I learned when I started is I didn't have a lot of language to go with this at all. I had to restructure my entire language because so much of my language was around a self and a this and a that and them and they and all that stuff that was constructed in a narrative of responsibility being in bits and pieces with different people at different times, rather than saying we're all responsible, period, 100%, not divisible. That's just the state of our existence. We're responsible, we're free to make choices, and the choices we make, we are free to accept as what we've done or pretend we had nothing to do with it. Those are all freedoms we have. One is healthy, one is unhealthy. One is productive, one is unproductive. One is functional, one is dysfunctional. That's all within the human scope of things. That is not in the absolute scope of things because nothing in reality is dysfunctional. And our alignment is starting to reckon with our nature is spiritual, what we call spiritual. I don't know what that means in all respects, but I know whatever it is, it is. And if that's our nature and we start thinking about it that way, we now are introducing to thinking an absolute stable nature rather than more and more instability, trying to correct the instability of the unstable thought that all we are is what we think.
All I am is what I think I am, with and without a drink.
Yeah.
Right? Or like,
Well, no, I would say all you are is what an absolute, if there's an absolute infinite knowing state of being, that would be our state, along with everything else and everyone else. So all that are and all that is would be qualified as being that state of absolute knowing would be essential to all of those things. It doesn't mean that all of those things functions, like organisms and bacteria and fungi and all that stuff. They all have a specific function that they're doing. It's not that they can't change, because they're always changing. But basically, they're what they are. They're not thinking about it. They do what they're designed to do, whatever the design is, whether it was cast on them or developed in evolution, whatever it was, it was. Whatever it is, it is. To begin to reduce all of the justifications and the rationalizations and the storytelling about how it happened and why it happened, and all that judgment begins to actually allow that awareness to become more obvious, which also clarifies, like cleaning your glasses, the problem as being a sick, insane, induced insanity. And that's all it's ever been.
Yeah, you went off on a different tact. What I was saying, Jack, is I'm insane both with and without a drink. You know what I mean?
I was thinking you were seeing the thinking as that disease.
Yeah, that's what you took those words and went in another way, which means like drugs and alcohol do what they do as naturally as they're made to do. Right?
Well, interestingly, Gabe, those, you drink a drink, you do a drug, and it alters your consciousness, your awareness, right?
Mm-hmm.
So too does denial when we're perfectly sober.
Almost more intensely for me.
Guaranteed. You know why?
Why?
Because it's not a you're inducing your own chemical body in your own body. You're inducing it. You're doing it. If you take a drug if you take, what do they call it? Phenobarbital, where they knock you out for a surgery or something.
Mm-hmm.
There's not a lot. You can't overcome that very good by thinking, you know what? I don't want to continue. I don't want to continue this. You're out.
Yeah.
When I had it once, I woke up wondering when they were going to start the surgery. I mean, time went away. It just vanished. But the point is, we're inducing this, and we're inducing the drugs in our laboratory. The body is a laboratory of chemicals. Our experience is based on those chemicals: dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, all of it, adrenaline, all of those different varieties. And there's probably things we haven't named yet that are variations, and also others that haven't even begun to be developed, because we're operating at this depressed state. Our body isn't able to actually function at its apex, its highest point, because we're simply trying to survive this onslaught of interior conflict that we're constantly seemingly condemning ourselves to. Speaking of missing my words, I went off into that opposite thing about taking a position and being neutral.
Mm-hmm.
That works in value judgments. So good and bad and all that are just decisions of how we like things. Like things, don't like things. What's good we like, what's bad we don't like, right? Up and down is pretty clear, because one is up and one is down. If you're on your head, it all reverses. Left and right, if you turn backward, it reverses. All that stuff is all flexible, and that's the point of that point. The bigger point was, though, that when it comes to true and false, there is no range between the two. It's one or the other within our human experience. It's not somewhat true and kind of false. If there's any false,
obviously you're not a lawyer. I could tell that right away.
Well, I mean, but to that point, Anthony, we're perfectly capable of arguing any point that can't even be made. We're perfectly capable of
now
arguing.
You sound like a lawyer.
Exactly. But we're perfectly capable of that. The question is it the best thing we can do? And aren't we subject to the ramifications of feeling pretty bad, or feeling pretty conflicted, or feeling out of sorts when we do those things, and take them seriously enough to think that they're the only thing we can do, which is the addictive tendency? The first thought is, I don't have anything to do with it. The next thought is, I can't do anything about it. So what do? Keep doing the thing that's wrong, thinking I have no other choice. It's a complete setup of thought. It isn't a reality we're facing. It's a condition we're creating.
That's great.
So when it comes to that true and false thing, it isn't a range. If you have 2 + 2 is 3 in a equation that is beautifully drafted, crafted, and developed by the best mathematician in the universe, it will be wrong. The impact of that may be slight, but it slight or not, it's 100% of the impact of what makes that wrong. That one simple deviation. And it seems to make thinking become impossible when we think of it the normal way we do, which is us thinking about our thinking, coming to a conclusion that's absolutely right, coming to a conclusion that's absolutely happy and joyous and free. But in beginning to see that if we already know everything, all we're doing with our thinking is hyperventilating in trying to have thinking conclude what we already know rather than recognize that. If you recognize something for what it is, it has no power. If something you've been thinking has power that has no power, you've been giving it power to make believe it has some life, some source. It doesn't when it comes to thinking about thinking as reality. Thinking about thinking just generates more thinking, which is why the mental obsession is obsessive. So if it's untrue, we're going to feel a disturbance. But for me, after decades of denial and numbness and tension in my body wasn't feeling things very well anymore. When I talked about not feeling well, think of that as a sentence. It doesn't mean I feel sick, I'm nauseous. It means I'm not feeling well. I'm not good at feeling anymore. My bodily sensations have become so stressed. My nervous system has become so overused. My adrenaline has become used up. My dopamine, serotonin, all the well-being are gone. They've been used for things that weren't emergencies as though they were emergencies. They were used to induce feelings of better while I was still thinking worse. So what do I need of those drugs, those naturally reoccurring drugs? More and more and more and more to the point that I stress the system, it can't even produce them. And what do we tend to do in society? Add them back in, come up with a new pill that you can add them back in. We don't look at the core of why our body's no longer producing them accurately. So we think the only solution we have is circumstance outside us. It's not true. And I'm not suggesting those things don't help. I'm sure they help, like vitamins can help and all that stuff. But as a sole source, it shows how quickly we are to come up with outer decisions and conclusions rather than look at the inner problem that's causing those things.
So Jack, there, like you said, it's an accurate reflection of something wrong.
Yes.
And I personally, I don't know how to put it into words, continue on the wrong path. The wrongness is seemingly more attractive, literally like in a magnetic sense. Like it's, does that make sense? That it's the wrongness is not that I'm thinking something that is wrong. The wrongness is where I'm going.
But you remember earlier you said when you were in it, you can't see it.
Yeah.
And here you are seeing it while you're in it.
Yeah, I'm seeing only one direction, I guess is what I'm saying. Seeing.
But see, Gabe, we've been lying so long that we think it's true. And so those thoughts we had about I don't know are just convenient excuses to continue doing the same thing. And the fact is you begin to just challenge the basic thinking. And, Byron Katie, I don't know if you've ever listened to her or listened through her process. She had a huge experience herself with her own experience in life and just said, I've been lying. And here, her basic process, she talks to people and she says, is that true? And they say, yes, it's true. Is it absolutely true? Well, maybe it's not absolutely true. And as she goes down and picks up that one little pinprint, the whole story starts to unravel and people start to have an experience of their own upset, their own demoralized state, and begin to actually confront the thing they've been doing in a very simple process. So we are aware, but we're so quick to addictively use these narratives that tell us we're not and we can't be.
Is it possible you're aware and not aware? You keep focusing on we're all aware. Is it possible that you're aware but not aware? I mean, it seems like you're pretty.
Anthony, in the one respect, we're absolutely aware and we can think we're not aware. And that's the distinction between thinking.
And that's the beauty. That's also a beauty, maybe. Maybe that's something great.
Very, very good. No. I think you just hit on something. The beauty is that in that absolute state, it never thinks I'm not aware.
Yeah,
because it doesn't think.
That's the beauty. And as long as you just realize that, you're ahead, right? That's how good it is.
But Anthony, if you're realizing it, you're introducing something that's absolute to your thinking, and your
Yeah,
thinking,
doesn't like
you
that.
just even said, which is rare, but I applaud you and I thank you and I appreciate it, that this could be great. This could be, you've all of a sudden blown the lid off of all those other ideas about what's wrong and what's imperfect and all, and say, wow, this could be something wonderful if you just admit it.
Well, I didn't say this could be. I said, is it possible? Because I wasn't that. So it seems like there's a
Well,
difference.
is it possible as this could be? I mean,
Yeah, I'm still standing away from it. This could be
Yeah.
great. It's like, I'm on board.
Don't dive in. You might get wet.
That's what people would tell me. They say, of course you listen to what you're telling yourself. It's in your own voice. It sounds so natural, right? It's like, Anthony, you should do this. It's
Well,
like it's your own voice.
Think about that, though. Insanity is typically defined as hearing and seeing things that aren't happening. If you're listening to your own voice, think about that. You're not talking. You're listening to it in your thoughts.
And I only could be here. What are the chances? The one time I don't say anything and I let you guys talk is the best meeting ever that I learned the most from. Damn it. What is the chance of that?
Well, let me tell you, the chances are really good and we appreciate it too.
Gabe is the one that's I feel like Gabe, because he was so honest right now, it made the whole thing great. So I appreciate that, Gabe. And then I get the credit for it. I'm like, this is the best meeting I've ever heard.
Listen, we have a capacity that is indisputable, except to the thinking we do, to try to use thinking again as the prominent.
And look at that word, indisputable means in dispute.
No, it means not disputable. But the point is, Anthony, is that in that absolute, if you begin to grok, just sort of come to terms with what absolute means, is that it's absolute. It isn't optional and it isn't negotiable. It isn't changing. We're talking about something that is a seamless present state of awareness, whatever it is, pure consciousness. Now, that has been mistaken through history to end up becoming, my estimation, gods that happen to be assigned very human traits. They're hateful, they're spiteful, they're vengeful, they're based in fear. Bible even says, I believe, that fear is the beginning of a relationship with God. Well, that would tell me that God is thinking. It's what we think about God that is fearful. It's not God. It's not an absolute source. It's not an infinite source, because there's no thinking in that at all. Thinking is something humans do. Insanity is something humans have. God isn't insane. God isn't coming to rescue us from insanity. What would God know about insanity? That's something we do. We've been given everything. If we have everything, it's what we're doing with it that's incorrect, that's mistaken, that's causing the problems. It's not what we have or haven't gotten from God, which we say often. God answers my prayers, doesn't answer my prayer. Oh, there, but for the grace of God, go I. If I'd been on that plane, I'd have been dead too. The plane happened to crash. Something was wrong with the plane. God isn't a mechanic in that regard and saying, oh boy, I better go fix that plane. There is no death in that reality, in that ultimate reality. Those are just things that we face. Just like we face birth. Death comes with birth.
I started to think the other day, this is where if this wasn't recorded, I wouldn't say this, but I was like, who am I really? Who do I want to be? Really trying to think. And I go, well, it's easier to say who I'm not. I keep trying to find who it's like, I'm not that, and I'm not that. It made it so much simpler.
Well, certainly the two would be the same, because this goes back to the opposites, Anthony, in terms of.
Thank God I mentioned this, because you have an answer. I was thinking, this is great. I can't wait to hear this.
Well, if you're thinking one thing, you're not thinking the other thing. If you're thinking this is really good, you're not thinking this is really bad.
Wait, you're telling I
But
can
you're
have two
thinking it.
thoughts. I can have two thoughts at the same time. Maybe that's one of the things that's great about me.
Oh, I
can
think
multi-think.
You can have many more than that, I imagine.
Yeah. Maybe that's the problem.
We think of our thinking only as the conversation about our thinking, and that is not the case. Our thinking is an analytical process that the brain does, that it's always gauging information, an enormous amount, trillions and trillions and trillions.
I thought I was doing it, to be honest with you. I thought I was doing it. I thought I was doing it.
Well, you maybe were.
You're saying it's the brain. I have nothing. I'm just along for the ride.
No, you're directing the brain. Like, I mean, when you pick up a cup of coffee, it's not your arm isn't saying, you know what, I'd like to feed
No,
my
I don't
mouse
think
some
you could just
coffee.
have other thoughts. Like if you don't like the color red, I don't think you just go, you know what, I like red now. Red is great. It doesn't work that way, unfortunately.
Well, it could.
Right?
You think it doesn't work that way because you don't work it that way. So you think it is the problem rather than your thinking.
Exactly.
You know, for years I didn't like strawberry ice cream. I liked chocolate. And then I tasted strawberry. I thought when this all started to occur to me, I started doing things I thought I didn't like. And I thought, wow, that's really good. Now that I'm not coming at it with this whole conclusion that it sucks, all of a sudden it was much better than I would have thought. And I really realized how manipulative my thinking
Yeah.
is and how cunning it is to make believe
Yeah.
that I need to maintain those positions to prove who I am, when in fact those positions limit the capacity I
Yeah.
have to actually interact with everything that's going on in any meaningful, productive, useful way.
Trying to talk yourself out of that bag of chips. That's always an interesting conversation. At the grocery
Well,
store, yeah. Let's have a
once the
conversation
conversation
about it.
begins, once the impulse begins, it's very often hard because that is the trigger. That trigger begins to impulsively react.
Yes.
So it isn't about stopping it once you've started it. It's about taking a deep breath and realizing, do I want to restart that thought now? Because it isn't
Or
happening
know
out
that
there.
if you try that fight at home, you're going to lose. Like the only way you have a chance of winning that fight is in the store, where you can walk away. But once you bring that bag of chips
No,
home, that
you're
fight is
turning it
over.
into some circumstantial understanding. You're always free not to choose, always. You choose those loops that give you the justification to think there's nothing else you can do because you want it. You want it, you know it's not good for you, and you know, it's easier to do something
Focus.
that isn't
This is
good
what
for
I want to
you when
focus
you
on.
think
That
it's
is
the
my
only thing you
problem.
can do.
Yeah,
I know it
this is
is.
what I really need your time.
I know it is.
It works
But
with
it's,
everything, shopping, food,
Anthony,
everything.
once you're in that thinking, you're going to drown in that thinking. And it's only the thinking you're doing about the thinking you're doing that's keeping you there. It's only thinking it's the only thing you can do because you begin to think, like Gabe was talking about, that you don't have anything to do with it. And it's now happening to
Yeah,
you. And who are you to
yeah,
say any different? My sense is when we're doing those things, we don't do anything compulsively that's healthy. So to actually do it sanely would make absolutely no sense because we know it's killing us. It's a suicidal tendency. It could be fried foods. It could be subtle. It could be donuts. It could be things that we think are so subtle. What's the difference? But 30 years later, there's a difference. It may not occur. You may not die from a heart attack immediately, but eventually your body's going to succumb to those decisions you've made that were impulsive because they taste good. You know they're not good for you, but it overruns the taste. The immediacy of that satisfaction overruns the long-term ramification.
yeah.
Because you don't think it's not happening now. I'm good. I can do this.
And how
now.
many years of research have you been doing on this?
68. But think of addiction, Anthony. Nobody tends to overdose on purpose. They always even call it an accident. How is it an accident when
Well,
somebody's
that's not
doing
true anymore. Now there's something new, but 20 years ago, that was more true. Right? With this fentanyl.
I still hear it. It's an accidental overdose, fentanyl, whatever it was. The point is that we could even consider it an accident rather than look at someone's deliberate actions. When you start doing a drug or you start engaging with denial, you begin to build an intolerance to it to justify that it's okay. Because then,
Yeah,
you know what the
this is,
intolerance is? The desensitivity.
yeah,
You're becoming less and less aware of the impact by pretending it's not happening. Denial is the psychic anesthesia that we use to make believe what's not happening couldn't possibly happen to us because it hasn't happened yet. And most people that are dying of overdoses are not intending for that to happen, but I would say they're absolutely intending for that to happen. They're not intending in their thinking, but they're doing something that
yeah.
they know kills people
That's a
and
good
thinks
point.
it's not going to happen to me.
This is one of the best meetings I've been at. Coincidentally, the least I've said.
Did you have the wax removed this week or anything?
No, I just realized just for myself that I try to think of every possibility. The ultimate solution was something I didn't even think was possible. Like just what we
Right.
talked about. It's so bizarre. And I still,
Well,
And I don't trust the process. Like I think, well, that's the only time that's going to happen. I got to do now everything else to get it to where I want it to be. It's never going to happen again like that.
So think, Anthony, about the fact that if we're rooted in the idea that our thoughts need to figure it out, it's not a coincidence that all we consider are the worst case scenarios.
Yeah, that's a problem.
Well, it's actually a perfect reflection of the fact that when we start considering the thinking we're doing as the sole source, we're beginning to only look at problems that will occur as a result and not look at the manifestation of possibility that everything else can also happen too. All of that seems to dissolve in the blindness and this cocoon we create.
Yeah, I guess what I'm trying to say
continue.
is you were right. I just that word. You were right, buddy.
Well, this is about really just talking about it and seeing that we share something that is absolutely profound, spectacular in scope, and we act as though the only thing happening is the immediacy of the little problems we have and the scarcity of those little problems rather than the abundance of everything we share.
Do you think there was
Yeah.
a designer? My dad always used to get that question. Do you think there was some ultimate creator that had a design, a purpose, or is it all random but still through some designs?
Whatever it is, I'm not. And to get into that debate would spend a lifetime and go nowhere, as far as I'm
What does
concerned.
Gabe say?
Same answer.
Damn it.
Well,
Good answer.
let me try and sum it up for those that are listening that are not part of this group, is that Anthony and I have very similar problems in that our thinking, leads us to the bad places. And they're not the same thoughts and the same.
It used to work. I want to interject there too. It's a skill, but at some point you get too good at it. Like analyzing your problems is great, but if you do it too much, that's that excess.
Yeah, but I'm saying that, people out there listening may say, well, I don't have Anthony's problem or I don't have Gabe's problem, but the problem is the same. The solution we choose in our heads is the same ill-fated decision making and choice and all of that we've been talking about. So it's not to say that you may not be part of this group because you don't have these exact issues and problems. I think it's the mental obsession is what we're talking about here, wherever it may be in your life, who's listening. So.
Yeah, and my experience has been, Gabe, that people know when they have it. I don't have to tell them, but they may not know what it is. They may not know what to do about it. And that's largely because as an addiction, it's been the only thing we've been doing collectively, because it makes no sense to think there is anything else that can be done. And so it's
sometimes you don't even
preposterous.
think you have it. Sometimes you're not even aware that you have it, right?
Who's that?
Like that you say people know when they have this thing, but like you forget sometimes, I'm sure, right? That's the beauty. If you always knew, it'd be.
In any experience I have that exceeds the limits of thoughts, I'm always subject to the potential of pushing it away and pretending it's not there and fighting it.
Yeah,
yes,
exactly.
That's why we're never really cured, because the potential is always there. The difference is, as the sensitivity becomes more common and more aware, the immediacy of the realization happens, simultaneously to what's happening. It doesn't take a week or a month or 2 months. But I wouldn't suggest to you that even in saying that, it means that everything, because if those blinding things are still happening right now, why would I presume to know those if I'm still doing those? I would know to at least say, to Gabe's point earlier, that if I'm doing it right now, I'm doing it, rather than say, as far as I can tell, I don't do that anymore because I'm much quicker to dissect or to take those things apart. But I guarantee you, if you have any compulsions at all, you're thinking obsessive thoughts. They're connected to them immediately. If you have any things that you do that aren't moderate, that aren't balanced, that you can take or leave without thinking about it, you're thinking about thoughts that aren't true. So to see that is also to see that we've developed cultures that have a lot of imbued ideas in them that aren't true, that we still believe are true and don't even think about, because I would say we think about them, we don't think we think about them because they're not as obvious in that sort of superficial conversation of awareness that we have in our brain. So we think they're not happening. When, I would admit that if the world is still compelled to fight the way that it does, and to be corrupt in the way that it does, and to subject people who might be a little weaker to more vulnerability than they need, I would say that we're all doing it to that degree still, because in the not doing of it would be the elimination of those things. Those things wouldn't happen because health would prevail, decisions would be more thoughtful, more considerate, more beneficial, abundance would keep, everybody would have so much they wouldn't want it, compared to now they can't get enough. All that would disappear, because we've for all that we've ever used up in massive quantities compared to what we needed, there still seems to be more enough for us to continue today. That's pretty startling, to have 8 billion people plus going at it as ferociously as possible to get as much as they possibly can. And I'm not saying everybody in that population is doing that, but it's certainly been a consistent direction that almost every country and every people have been at war with somebody at some point over a thought, or a collection of thoughts, a bundle of thoughts. So if we're doing it, good chance we're all doing it. We can do it differently and still be doing it the same, because both ends of that opposite are part of the same. Good and bad come together. Right and wrong come together.
Before you fly a plane, you have to do like a walk around the plane, check that the flaps are working, that the wheels. What would you say a good walk around for the morning? Like, how do you start literally? Do you focus on like everything I'm thinking isn't true? I don't need to worry about losing things. I have everything. Like, what's your walk around checklist? I'm just curious.
I take a walk. Listen, Anthony, one of the things, Gabe, to your point, and I wanted to stress this a little bit to you also from yesterday, is that getting clear about this stuff is actually beginning to get clear about things that are actually disturbing. Now, I'm not talking about disturbances that I'm creating to give me a distraction from paying attention to disturbances that are happening and then wondering why things go to hell and I'm caught off guard. I'm talking about actually looking at things honestly. I would say I have more sadness than I've ever felt, having gone through this situation with my daughter back in December. I never processed death that way before, and really, really recognized how I had savored her existence, even though we didn't always get along. We didn't always see things the same way. She was an attorney, by the way, and she was as driven as anybody I ever knew. She could be very caustic in her approach, but it didn't eliminate the potential for some great characteristics in her that were so redeeming and so sort of considerate of other people, almost to the degree that she considered other people more than her own experience. But I'd never gone through that, where I actually felt those things and actually appreciated them and gave credit for them. And I realized that's the tribute to her, being honest about it. Now, a lot of that came from just decompressing and decompressing and decompressing. And decompression, if you think about it, is taking the inflammation out. What's inflammation? Grandiosity, big ideas. And depression at the other side is to use those grandiosity in the outside looks like egoism. I want more, look at me, I got everything. On the inside, it turns the exact opposite direction into depression. Because the bigger it gets, the worse I get, the more depressed I get, the more the conflict that occurs. But beginning to see those things and not be engaged in those things in the way addictively is to allow the body to actually respond legitimately. And my experience was it actually gives it a chance to do it in all respects to all other things I never bothered to do it with in the moment it happened, because they've been stored somewhere in the tension that I've maintained in my body. And they release. So many more tears, much greater sense of awareness. And the awareness of tears, I realize now too, is not just self-pity and a sense of demoralization, but a sense of awe and a sense of appreciation for the connections, the subtle connections. Witnessing them is very moving. And emotion is sort of a moving experience if it's actually moving. If it's constipated, it seems like a problem, because all I'm stuck with are the ramifications of feelings I don't want anything to do with. Versus realize this fluidity, this light, this passage, this channel, this ever-present newness is actually the invigoration of our experience and the inspiration of everything that's happening and everything that's potential for us to act on. To the degree that I don't act on those things, I feel depressed about that. I don't feel good about that. I feel that there's a lack. And it isn't now that the lack, it's a lack in what I decide to do about that. How am I going to approach that? Can I get better at doing that? What does that mean? How does that translate? So that can be depressing. But if you're depressed about something depressing, that's aligned. If you're depressed about something that you're creating that doesn't exist, that's insanity. That's a conflict. That's an inner turmoil that's being created. And what do we want to do? Put ourselves out of the misery. Why? Because we've forgotten or don't want to pay attention to the fact that we're creating it. We're restarting it, restarting it, restarting it, restarting it every moment by maintaining those thoughts that are clearly telling us something is seriously wrong. My experience is I get better talking to people about it. I thank them for their problems because we get to work on them and look at them and be honest about things that are often left unsaid. And there's a splendor in that, as you know, Anthony, because I met you on a basis of you almost fell out of your chair. And I remember your face, you kind of lit up.
Yeah.
That is described in the big book. You don't want to miss those moments of these people coming to terms with this. We get to turn the corner in sobriety and begin to realize we've been at the center of it. Emotional sobriety is beginning to realize that that center was not solved by getting sober. It was just the beginning of being able to look at it honestly so we can begin to confront what's actually happening rather than what we make believe is happening. We begin to undo the doing we would normally do and begin to face the things we haven't been paying attention to at all. And it can be a disturbing process. But at least it's disturbing because it's a disturbance, and as you match the two, they dissipate naturally, dissolve actually. We're not getting better at, we're not trying to get better at feeling better about things that are worse. We're trying to get better at feeling what's worse. So we can actually acknowledge it, live with it, sit with it, breathe through it, begin to allow it to dissipate. And the tension goes with it too.
Thanks, Jack. I think that's
Yeah, that was amazing, you guys. Thanks, Gabe. Thanks for your honesty.
Thank for you guys too. And
Thanks,
Anthony, that's what I would like to do, as we talked about, is narrow the conversation a little bit. I think that there's a lot to handle when people are half-heartedly involved in this and not sincere about their own well-being. And yet, which is one of the reasons I try to break the stories up, is to show the reactivity. I don't think that's probably the best thing for me to do. I don't know. To me, it makes it so blatantly clear, but I'm not sure that comes across to others. But I don't think I need to be sure to be able to have it used as something to see that, yes, we are highly reactive when people interfere with this story we keep telling because we really believe our life depends on it. And now we've refined it to the newest version. Think of perversion in that regard. We've got the newest version of this story that we think is brand new and shiny, and we got to get it out. And if you believe it, you're going to see me, you're going to understand me. But what are we really telling them? That my thinking is who I am. Because my story is based all in that thinking about who I am, not who I actually am, that I share with that other person infinitely and absolutely. So all of a sudden, I need them to be my co-pilot, my co-conspirator, my codependent partner in this crime that I'm committing, this violation of virtue and morals. So looking for the moral in the story is the value of the story. It's the point of the story, not how to retell it in a way that everybody says, oh, I should feel sorry for you. You are just suffering such impossible things that are, there's nothing greater on the impact in our experience than what we do on our own thinking. And to begin to see that is begin to come to terms with how sick we've been while we thought we were fine because we were operating at a level. Imagine that we can operate at any kind of productive level while we're suffering with this 24 hours a day, compared to beginning to imagine what actual productivity is when we're not suffering and struggling with it at all. And I don't suggest letting go of everything immediately. I suggest that if there's nothing to hang on to and you begin to consider that, you'll start to see that all you've held on to is an idea in the present, that you had anything to hold on to that was something you wanted to let go of. You begin to see that it happens automatically.
Yeah. And you probably should give a disclaimer, get in the habit of every show. You know, if you have anybody listening, right, you should do if anybody listening disclaimer.
And what
In
would
a
that say?
habit of just that seek medical, you know, that this is not licensed and you don't have a medical license. So seek somebody that is medically licensed to help in this situation.
Well, in the introduction, that's all spelled out, that this isn't a medical thesis. It isn't
I
an
like that part.
academic, scientific, none of that stuff. So that stuff is all spelled out. And there are ways to help. Some people may be on the capacity of a conversation to resolve these issues. But my goal is to talk to people that aren't that far gone, who are within that range of being able to talk about it. So more and more people are able to talk about it and start to actually be sane in the face of insanity, which would certainly give somebody someone who is struggling with this induced state of insanity. And I'm not talking about insanity as a genetic predisposition or any of that kind of stuff. We're talking about induced insanity here. We're talking about something I do to that self I call mine. That's something I create in my own choices. I can think I don't, but who else would be doing it if I didn't exist, to me?
Great point.
So to that point, if people are suffering and struggling, I'm not suggesting this is the only thing to do. I'm suggesting that if it is something you're doing to create the depression, then you can certainly undo it. If we can make it worse, we can make it better. If we can make it better, we can eliminate it and start to actually see that the nature of it is simply relying on thoughts that aren't true. And if we talk about it in those terms, it would be good for other people who can't talk about it in those terms to actually witness people who aren't functioning on that basis and aren't creating the reactivity and the conflicts and the fights that tend to go along with that. So thank you, though, Anthony. I think that's important, especially with suicide at an all-time high. There are options for every source of a problem today, especially within sobriety and especially within chemical abuse, anything addictive. There are avenues and there are options, and there are plenty of people ready to help at no cost. Some of them come at a cost, most of them don't. Many of them don't. I don't know most or less, but
That was a great meeting today, Jack.
thank you, sir. I agree. I appreciate you very much. Gabe, you too.
Yep. Thanks, Jack. Great.
See you around campus.
See you around campus. Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.